On the Joy of Football podcast this week, we're celebrating the smaller clubs and the not quite elite players who dream the impossible dream and then go out and achieve it. All the regular items are here, and don't forget you can hear or see the podcast wherever you get your normal podcasts, and you can contact us by email at the joys of football podcast at gmail.com, and get yourself on our Patreon and have a look at all the regular items there as well. This is the Joy of Football. Here it is. The Joy of Football podcast. Hosted by me, Neil Barnett. With Martin Tyler.
Looks like Xavi! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello. One of the most intense joys of football, the greatest addiction in the world, is the dream of the impossible. And that's what Martin Tyler, the voice of the Premier League, and I are looking at today. The dream and maybe the act of the impossible. Martin, since the Champions League went to 4 Premier League clubs per season, the only non-Big Six clubs to qualify have been in 2003 Newcastle, in 2005 Everton, who lost their qualifier and therefore didn't go into the group stage, in 2016 Leicester as champions, and last summer Newcastle again, even though it was a bit of a big 7 by then. It could be that Aston Villa do it this year. How great an achievement would that be?
It's amazing, and you have to be our sort of age to remember Villa being European champions, and therefore going into the following year Champions League as the winners of the trophy. Amazing transformation. It's not that long ago that we were looking at Villa as a championship team. It's not that long ago we were looking at them staying up on the last day of the season to retain their Premiership status. So I have to say, it's the way they've done it, the charisma of Unai Emery, the obvious way that he has been given, and this is what I think the essence of it, he's been given, I call it the keys to the club. His decisions are the ones that are ratified. He's the one who goes into the recruitment department and says, I want him, and him. And I understand there's plenty of work going on in that respect at the moment. So they haven't done it yet. The last few games are slightly affected, obviously, by the involvement in Europe as well. So they've done it side by side by playing in the Europa Conference League. And I have to say, that in itself is a remarkable achievement. They score goals. They do concede a few. Unai's not one for the nil-nils, is he? Which is great for the viewers, whichever way you look at it, really. And he's improved the players. I think individually he's improved the players. So, yes, I mean, it's not done, but if it is done, I'm there for the Liverpool game, so I might see it being done, but that's a tough fixture in itself.
Yeah, and they're not the only club that's achieving it this summer. Girona will definitely come in the top 4 in Spain. Whether or not they'll get into the Champions League depends on UEFA's attitude to multi-ownership and the degree to which that is multi-ownership. It could be that Girona could finish 2nd and Manchester City finish 3rd. Unlikely, but it could be that, and then Girona would get in, and it's a question of whether Manchester City would or not. But
Manchester City aren't going to finish 3rd now. No. So
the City group has not globally automatically led to success. What's happened at Girona is a massive achievement in their own right.
I was at home and the game against Barcelona came on, and I thought I'll watch a bit of this because I haven't really studied Girona, but I obviously known about their remarkable progress. They went 1 down, a goal from your non-goal scoring friend Andres Christensen again.
He's unbelievable, isn't he?
That was a brilliant goal too. They equalised something like 90 seconds later, and then just before half-time they conceded a penalty awarded on VAR. And to be honest with you, I switched off. I thought, well, that's it. Barcelona scored the penalty, Lewandowski, so it was an automatic response. And then I heard they won. And I thought, oh, you idiot, why didn't you follow it through, So, there are complexities with the ownerships. That's not just reflected, obviously, with Manchester United and the Nice connections now with Sir Jim Ratcliffe. So it is going to happen. I think one day we should do a podcast on ownership and how it's developing. There are some good things about it, some really proper people investing in the football clubs. There is obviously, as Everton seem to be reflecting at the moment, a more dangerous side to it. And we don't get to know. That's the hard part. I don't think even those who are doing the fit and proper tests can get so much to know because of data protection, and so it's not as easy. You can't always blame those who have empowered these potential owners. It's a complicated issue, but I think it's fundamental to the way football is going, and I do think it deserves constant monitoring and at times investigation.
Stuttgart have qualified for it. They haven't been in it for a long time. I remember going to a knockout game in Stuttgart in 2004. When Claudio Ranieri was Chelsea manager. And the thing I remember most was the evening before the game, going into a pub with Kerry Dixon, which obviously you go into a pub when you're with Kerry, going into a pub with Kerry and several other people. And it was standing only in this pub. And they had the football. It was a Tuesday night. We must have had a Wednesday night. It was a Tuesday night. And I remember Bayern Munich were playing. I remember Oli Kahn throwing a goal in for whoever Bayern Munich were playing against. But it was standing room only, and we were standing next to this pillar, and there was a shelf at chest height, and we hadn't eaten. And we found that the pub did food, but you had to eat it standing up, and that's why the shelf was at chest height, so that it was near. So I remember just getting this dish and putting it on this shelf and eating it standing up and watching the Bayern Munich game, and and Oli Kahn threw one in.
One thing you don't realise is that the next Neil podcast will be the joy of food. And he could probably bang on even better than he does about football, because it's a very important part of his life. It should be an important part of all our lives, but not so many of us are quite as diligent about the right kind of flavours.
Talking of Germany, I also remember a game away to Schalke where we were staying in Essen, and we went for this meal the night before the game. And there was nothing on the menu that I fancied. I think this was a Tuesday night game, so it was a Monday night, and not everywhere in Essen was open. And we sat down and we went to a steakhouse. I mean, who goes to a steakhouse abroad? But I got outvoted, and we went to this steakhouse, a few of us, and it was just nothing in there, and starters, nothing. And then I looked at it more carefully, and it was tomato soup with gin. Now, that's not unlike, if you think about it, a Bloody Mary, except it's not vodka. So I said, all right, I'll have a bit of that. Tomato soup with gin. Ladies and gentlemen, try it. It works in Essen. It works everywhere. What a brilliant idea. Tomato soup with a slug of gin. I think tomato soup's so boring, but with gin.
It works in essence and in Essen as well. So,
but Stuttgart, a welcome return to the Champions League.
Definitely, and of course, and I'm going to come on to it in my letter from the Gantry, the extra place that they're protected now by Germany getting the fifth place in the. That's going to be a topic for discussion. The new format of the Champions League. I think probably we've got to give it a go to see how it works. But
too many games.
Well,
too many games.
What has happened? I think the the quarterfinals were sensational with 32 goals or something like that. Semi-finals haven't come short, have they? We've been treated to fantastic drama and action. And of course, the latter stages of the new format will be the same. It's the group games that are going to be more.
Well, they're not group games; they're league games. They're now called.
Yeah.
And I think that there's too many. And I also think that I've got to admit, I think the quality of football in the Champions League this year has been a long time low, but it hasn't affected the drama and the joy of it because the format is just so brilliant. And in the knockout stages. One other club I want to mention, Bologna. They haven't qualified as we speak, but they almost certainly will. And Bologna under Thiago Motta, who we've talked about in the previous.
You like him, don't you?
Yeah. But the thing about Bologna, I don't think they've ever been in the Champions League since it started in '92, and as Aston Villa haven't.
No, and what we want to see, a part of the joy of football, is the democracy of football. I think the fear for all of us who've been around a long time is that the procedure, if you like, or the pyramid, whatever you want to call it, needs to be protected. Excuse me. We can't just let the elite rule everything because that's the way they want to. I mean, anyone who runs a football club will want it all tilted in their direction. That's a natural thing. It's not. I'm not being critical of that, but I think those who can see the bigger picture would perhaps enjoy a discussion around the table with us, because we do fear. I've said on the podcast we've done so far that it's the elite football players I fear for, not the lads who are playing. I mean, there will be some internationals, of course, but they don't play if you're not in Europe. I mean, like Spurs have not played 40 games, might not play 40 games in the season, but obviously there are international commitments to go there. So, but there is enough, the season's long enough for those kind of, I think playing 50, 55 games is, you'd expect that as a professional footballer. I'd be disappointed. I mean, I know you've got a theory about, lads are happy just to play the under-21s and sit on the bench and this, that and the other. I'm not sure that's quite as prevalent as you would have me believe, but you want to play. I mean, and I had a very sketchy non-league career, but I wanted to play all the time. 3 games a weekend when I was at university. You just want to play. You love the game. You want to play, but it is. We do need to protect those who are going to be involved in the World Club Championships. Who are going to play more group games in the new format, and obviously want to represent their countries as well. And
everybody's going to be in the World Cup from now on, because it's just ridiculous.
Who's going to change it though? I've got a friend who works at FIFPro. I've had discussions with him in the last couple of weeks about, no one's going to say, well, we're working too hard, let's go on strike. No. I mean, these are lads who are earning, I know, 200 grand a week, and they won't want to go on strike anyway. But the fact is the careers might be shorter, but balance up the playing all these extra games with the improved medical support. So I know you've got a thing about how do you get your match fitness back, but you certainly get your body back quicker than you ever did. And I grew up, when I started commentating, the ex-players, a lot of them were almost on sticks, really. They're certainly walking with limps. They've been badly advised with injections, and that's not going to happen with this group, this generation, because there is a lot of protection. And I think also mentally it's being raised. There's the mental awareness around the Premier League, and I think that kind of pressure is also something that the elite players have to deal with. Then I don't know how you switch off. I mean, it would be interesting to sit down with a squad of Premier League players and say, what do you do to get your mind back to the normal world, the world the rest of us live in?
One final question on this. When the smaller clubs achieve this dream, do we expect too much? Because I look back at Leicester getting into the Champions League in 2016, and of course they didn't have a good Premier League season the following season and sacked Claudio Ranieri, but they got to the quarter-finals of the Champions League. And now I look at Brighton this season, and they haven't had a great league season at all compared to their last 2 league seasons, but they got to the quarter-finals of the Europa League. Should we expect more? Isn't that...
It's a novelty for certain clubs, obviously, and maybe the priority does slightly switch towards the European games.
And so it should. It's an adventure that they've not had before.
Well, not if you risk losing your Premier League status, they shouldn't. And that's the balance. And go back to what we said about Villa. I mean, as we speak, Villa are still in with a chance of getting into the final of the conference. Europa Conference, and they probably won't, but they've still got a chance of doing that. But to get to the semi-finals and still be pushing hard, the favourites to finish 4th in the Premier League, I mean, that's absolutely super good as the Germans would say.
And talking of Germany, let's move on to the great dreaming of the impossible this season. Borussia Dortmund making the final of the Champions League against Real Madrid. And that brings us to Martin Tyler's letter from the Gantry.
Well, it was the first time I'd been in a room with Jurgen Klopp. It was 11 years ago, far from a one-to-one meeting, I must say. We were in the press conference theatre at Wembley Stadium. I was there preparing my commentary for the 2013 Champions League final, Jurgen as manager of one of the teams, Borussia Dortmund. He'd already forged a reputation not just as a fine coach, but also as a personality. Indeed, he started with a joke along the lines of, "I was told England is a green and pleasant land. Not what I've seen so far." He'd been driven through the industrial outskirts of the stadium and the packed streets of northwest London. We all laughed. It was a good observation from him. Just over 2 years later, he was to land at Liverpool and make such a difference at Anfield. And now, as he's on the very point of leaving England, Borussia Dortmund are back at Wembley, and it will be Edin Terzic in the Klopp seat in the press conference and the Dortmund dugout in their first Champions League final since 2013. Actually, the year Edin left the Dortmund coaching system to join Slaven Bilic at Besiktas in Turkey. The pair then enjoyed a couple of years at West Ham. So unlike Klopp back then, Terzic has already spent time in England. Unlike Klopp, he won't be surprised at the lack of greenery around the National Stadium. And unlike Klopp, he won't be pitting his wits against Bayern Munich at Wembley, semi-final losers to Real Madrid 24 hours after Dortmund's extraordinary triumph in Paris. Dortmund supporters are rightly famous for the Yellow Wall, a huge stand holding almost 25,000 fans, the south bank end of their Signal Iduna Park. Yellow Wall also describes perfectly the remarkable resilience of the yellow-kitted German club on the field. They were total outsiders at the beginning of the tournament. They started in a group of death, with last year's semi-finalists Milan, nouveau riche Newcastle United, and with what turned out to be perfect symmetry, Paris Saint-Germain. Their first game was like their most recent, in the Parc des Princes. They lost 2-0 back in September. In fact, PSG took 4 points off them in that group, but Dortmund still finished top. They then scraped through the round of 16 against PSV Eindhoven, who missed a barrow load of chances. Defeat in the away leg of their quarter-final versus Atletico Madrid seemed certain to put an end to the run and the fun. But a storming second half in the second leg blew away Diego Simeone's usually battle-hardened players. Progress to the semi-final was seen as a reward for teamwork and true grit, so PSG were marked down as favourites to reach the final and maybe at last fulfil the undisguised ambition of their Qatari ownership in getting themselves on the roll of honour of European club football's greatest prize. They were thwarted by the on-field yellow wall and the whites of the frames of the goals in Dortmund and in Paris. 6 times PSG hit the woodwork over the 2 games, 14 in all their matches in this season's Champions League, the most since such data had been collated over the past 20 years. It's not yet meant to be for PSG. How they must wish for that magic touch of Real Madrid in the competition. In both games, all of Paris' starting players were under 30, youth very much part of their new mantra. Different for Dortmund. 35-year-old defender Mats Hummels was the player of the first leg and scored the 1 goal in the second, to add to the splendid strike in the home game from 31-year-old Niklas Füllkrug, a late developer from Germany's second tier who will probably spearhead his nation's challenge for the European Championship on home soil next month. Hummels played in Dortmund's Wembley visit in 2013, so too did Marco Reus, a shrewd substitute in both legs of the recent semis. If he features at Wembley, as surely he must, it will be his final game for the club he has served so well for 12 years. We wait to learn whether it will be the final game of his second Dortmund spell for Jadon Sancho, this time in exile from Manchester United, who 24 hours before that semi-final in Paris had, amongst other weaknesses, been very short of numbers in a 4-0 defeat at Crystal Palace. My dear old dad gave me one very good piece of advice. Never go to bed on a grudge. Sort out problems, arguments, differences as soon as possible, or you risk an impasse, as now between Erik ten Hag, the manager of his parent club, and Sancho. Now, Sancho has already played in Wembley finals for both United and England. As I speak, Ten Hag is still scheduled to be at Wembley the weekend before the Champions League final, leading the Red Devils in the FA Cup final. It may be his last day in the job. It seems Sancho has come out better from a standoff which could have been avoided by a rapid response to the original spat. Ironically, Sancho has also played a part in England losing out in their quest for the extra fifth qualifying spot available under the competition's new format. Dortmund's home win over PSG sealed that particular deal. With vested interest, of course, they themselves sit fifth in the Bundesliga. Edin Terzic was a fan sitting in the stands when Jurgen Klopp brought Dortmund to Wembley in 2013. I've no idea what plans the departing Liverpool manager has for Saturday, June the 1st, but it would be lovely if he could take that not very scenic route one more time and return the compliment.
It's brilliant that they're there. But I have a problem with Dortmund, and I've always had a problem with Dortmund. I want them to be my German club. I support them because they're the most likely team historically to overwhelm Bayern Munich. I mean, for people who don't visit Germany, if you go to Berlin and talk football with anybody, 50% of the people you will talk to will be Bayern Munich fans, even though it's so far away from Munich, Berlin. And that's how it is in Germany. Just 50% of Germany seem to be Bayern Munich fans.
Juventus is a bit like that in Italy as well.
Yeah, except Juventus aren't very popular in Turin, where they're based. But Munich are just so overwhelmingly the most popular team. But Dortmund have this capacity of 80,000 and normally get almost 80,000 people to their home games. And it bugs me that they are a selling club and they can't turn that into something more fruitful. And I just look over the last 12 years at what Borussia Dortmund have done. And they have sold to Bayern Munich Mats Hummels, Robert Lewandowski went end of contract, I think. Mario Götze, the winner of the World Cup, of course. They've sold to Manchester United, Shinji Kagawa, Henrik Mkhitaryan and Jadon Sancho. To Manchester City have gone Ilkay Gundogan and Erling Haaland. To Arsenal, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. To Chelsea, Christian Pulisic. To Barcelona, Ousmane Dembele. To Real Madrid, Jude Bellingham. They have sold their soul.
Well, they're a club that develops players and they don't charge very much to get in because you've got English fans going to Dortmund. You say that your German team, these are probably their team for English fans who just get the flight over. The entrance to the Yellow Wall is pretty cheap compared to prices in the Premier League. And the structure of German football doesn't really allow clubs to build up the sort of bankroll, the development into keeping all the players they develop. Not all those players that you mentioned have been developed by Borussia Dortmund. So they brought them in, fattened them up, if you like, and sold them on for a good profit. It'd be very interesting to see what happens to Sancho, who made it pretty clear over the two games, I think, that he wants to have another year in Dortmund, and that a loan for another year might be the way to deal with it. But of course, if there is a change in Manchester United management, that might be reflected in a different pathway for Jadon Sancho. I'm sure there are faults on both sides in that argument, but I do think it's no point letting... One of, I think, the worst traits of human nature is letting problems fester and have feuds when we have the capacity to talk and discuss and compromise. And compromise is a word that I fully believe in, and I don't know that I see enough of that in a world where going way beyond football, where compromise seems to be impossible.
I mean, the other thing about Dortmund, of course, it is a one-club city in a way that Newcastle is, or in a way that Leeds is, and you sense that when you're there. And they've just got one traditional German restaurant in the middle of the city where
food.
You go and have your pork knuckle, your sauerkraut, and either dumplings or potatoes, and it's and huge glasses of beer, and it's an absolute dream. It's Dortmund's a great trip.
I think the bottom line for this is, well done, Dortmund. Is it going to be a repeat of 2013? How they come up a second narrowly? Yeah,
I honestly, I look at it and I just think although this is a bit of a misnomer, but I just think the difference in the semi-finals of the Champions League between Mbappe and Vinicius was Neuer and Kobel, because Neuer for me was the man of the match until 2 minutes from time when he threw one in, and Kobel, who I think is a really good goalkeeper, didn't have a particularly good game, but when he slapped it across and Mbappe fired for the goal, he pulled off the save, as it turned out, of the semi-finals, because that kept them in it. Extraordinary.
Kobel is somebody I've learnt about as gone along, a Swiss international, not necessarily even regarded as the best Swiss goalkeeper.
Well, Jan Sommer.
Yeah, and I'm sure he'll succeed Jan Sommer. And in the end, it will, when they look at all these films that are being made now about how Dortmund got to the final and maybe how they win it, he'll feature large, and he's the most unspectacular. He's not a goalkeeper that seems to seek the shots of the cameras, even the saves. You go, oh, that's one for the cameras with some goalkeepers. He's not like that, and he's fitted in perfectly with two centre halves who gamble. Schlotterbeck's the other one with Hummels. They do take a chance, and I think if you'd looked at some of the games before the semi-finals, you'd say, well, that could be the weak point. And in the end, it was super strong.
Yeah, Kobel. I saw him last season, and he looks a very good goalkeeper indeed.
When he's a legend, they'll be giving out the awards, the Kobel Prize, won't they?
Hey, right. Coming on to 3 of the best. The podcast version, of course. 3 of the best: young player, old player, and player. Martin, your young player.
Well, this is a quirky one, really, but forgive me, it's just tickled my fancy. We're still on the Dortmund beat. Shell Vaitchen. It's not an easy name to read or pronounce, but that's, I believe, the way of pronouncing it. He's 18 years old. He was a substitute, not used in the 2 semi-finals, but in between made a very impressive Bundesliga debut in the 5-1 win over Augsburg, the domestic fixture. They played. Paris didn't play, incidentally, between the 2 legs of the semi-final. But the fact they got his name on the team sheet and he was there in Paris says a lot about the unity at the club, because on the morning of the semi-final second leg, he was sitting a 5-hour maths exam back in Dortmund. And it would be wrong to say they put a private plane on for him, because there was a plane going with some of the other players who hadn't travelled with the team. So he jumped, got a lift on that and turned up, and obviously was part of a wonderful night. And in the morning he'd done his academic education. In the evening it's part of his football education. So I'm sure we're going to hear a lot of him, because he's a very promising player.
I'm going for the best young player I've seen against my Chelsea this season. And he's someone who will be involved, one assumes, in Champions League football next season. I can't see him going out on loan, and that's Conor Bradley, the Liverpool right back. It will be very interesting to see what happens with the new manager, the Jurgen Klopp successor, as to where Trent Alexander-Arnold plays. Will he play at right back? Will he play in midfield? Because if he is moved into midfield, the successor is there. I think that Conor Bradley looks that good already. I got to interview him after Liverpool reached the League Cup final, the Carabao Cup final, with a draw at Fulham, a game that got very tight. And he wasn't well known then. So I got him to introduce himself before we actually did the rest of the interview. And this is how it went. Conor, you're going to a League Cup final, Wembley final. Can you just, this is for listeners in USA and Canada, can you introduce yourselves to them and just tell them who you are?
It's Conor Bradley. I'm from Northern Ireland, and I'm playing with Liverpool, right back. And then, we just beat Fulham to get into the final of the Carabao Cup, and we're going to Wembley.
And you're a Northern Ireland international?
Yeah, I've played over 10 times for Northern Ireland, so very proud moment playing for them too.
But you look comfortable, you look as though you're a Liverpool player straight away. How has that happened?
I don't know, we've just been training since I came over at 16. That's what we're trained for. We're trained to come into the first team and do well. So all credit to the academy coaches, Barry Lewis and people like that who have really helped me along the way. and got me ready for coming in and taking my chance.
Conor Bradley there, coming to you in association with SiriusXM FC in the United States and Canada. That's where that was first heard. So a lovely, articulate young man, and I think someone who looks as though he's already got the quality to be a regular Premier League player. Conor Bradley, my young player this week. We're going to go straight from there to the player that we're talking about.
Well, while you were talking, Neil, it just triggered a thought in my mind that I changed my person, actually, to Nathaniel Klein, who now plays as the right-sided centre-back in a back three for Crystal Palace, having returned to his first club. But of course was a right-back for Liverpool for a number of years, and a very good one. So he's learning a new position, and part of the scoreline at Selhurst Park was 0 for Manchester United. So the defensive side of that, very good Palace team, and they were very good. And I think that the fact that he's adapted to this new role and really taken on board Oliver Glasner's philosophy, played really well. And he is actually older than Casemiro, who was blamed on the night for not adapting to a new position and looking like somebody that perhaps, his time at the top has gone. I'm sure, you don't get to be Casemiro without having a lot more resilience than perhaps that night showed. So I wouldn't rule him out. I wouldn't be one of those to say he's got to be shipped out or that his top level career is over. I think he's still hoping to keep playing for Brazil, so that doesn't come easy. But Nathaniel Klein took on that role. The back three were rock solid. Yes, they weren't over-challenged by Manchester United, but Manchester United don't fail to score very often, and they did fail to score. So Nathaniel, my personal memory of him was a few years ago when I was working on the FIFA computer game, which I had the pleasure of being part of for some 15 years. And there was a live contest in London when the new game came out involving footballers. And Alan Smith and I did live commentary on it, which was quite a difficult thing to do. But the winner of the tournament was the aforementioned Nathaniel Klein. And so I'm sure he's still very good on the latest version of that game. He's certainly very good still on the game that matters to him.
Yeah, he's had a lot of injuries down the years, which has affected his pace a little bit at right back. And going into a back three is something that he's acclimatized to so easily.
He read the game perfectly.
Yeah. Right, I've got two. I'm being indulgent this week, but they are two Borussia Dortmund players to keep us in the loop. We've talked a lot about Mats Hummels. I just want to say a couple of things about him that we haven't said. First of all, he was one of the first players anywhere in the world to join Juan Mata's common goal and give 1% of his salary to charity. And I think doing that from Germany to something started by a player in Manchester, who was at Manchester United when he started that, is just something that puts him in the highest esteem for me. So Mats Hummels, huge respect. I remember going to a Champions League game, covering it for radio at Anfield in 2019, which of course the year that Liverpool won it. In the knockout stage, Liverpool 0, Bayern Munich 0 in the home leg. And I remember being stuck in Poland or somewhere with Chelsea on the second leg when Liverpool won in Munich. But that night, Liverpool couldn't break down Bayern Munich, and Mats Hummels could not run. He was so slow. I couldn't believe how slow he was. But his positioning was perfect. His challenging was perfect. His reading of the game was perfect. His technique was perfect. And it didn't matter that he couldn't run. Even more alarmingly, which might explain why Bayern Munich was struggling at this stage, in midfield in front of him was Javi Martinez, the Spanish defensive midfielder. Another player spent a lot of his time injured. Javi Martinez. What did I say?
Javi.
Oh,
yeah, Javi
Martinez.
Spanish, I have to do this from time to time. I'm judged by my pronunciations, so Neil needs a bit of work.
Javi Martinez, he couldn't run either, and yet almost nothing was no one was running off him. He was outstanding that night. It was a back to the wall job, but I loved their performances that night, and Hummel's still doing it. But my other Borussia Dortmund player is Marcel Sabitzer. And Marcel Sabitzer, Marcel Sabitzer, the Tyler Dictionary. Marcel
pedantic people are awful.
Sabitzer,
I apologise.
Who of course is Austrian.
He is, yeah.
And who really came to my light for RB Leipzig. And I went to a Champions League game at Tottenham in February 2020, a knockout game, and Leipzig won 1-0 at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I think it was there and not at Wembley. Sabitzer ran the game. And the thing about Sabitzer is... The thing about Sabitzer is that he can't run. He's one of these players that there seems to be quite a few doing well now who can't quite become world class because he can't run. He can run forever. He's perpetual motion. But I thought he was going to become an absolute world class player. But he went to Bayern Munich and never quite got a regular first team place there. He went to Manchester United and on loan and never quite got the opportunity there. I thought he deserved it and never got it. And he's gone to Borussia Dortmund. And he's fulfilled everything I believed in him. He had quite a good Euros with Austria. But he's gone to Borussia Dortmund, and in the second half against Atletico Madrid in the quarterfinals, he ran the show. He completely ran the show.
He scored the crucial goal, didn't he, in the end, yeah.
And he made the goal for Martin as well. Yeah. I think he's a fantastic player, not quite at the level of the De Bruynes and what have you, but he is a fantastic player, and he deserves this more than anyone. So that's Hummels and Sabitzer, I'll get it, are my players this week. Old player.
Well, I've got a lot to say. I'm going to nick what you've been able to achieve and not just double up, treble up in passing, really, because I was lucky enough to manage, very much in brackets, a Woking Legends team last Friday, and we had some great players. Matt Jarvis, who played for England, and Ian Selly, who played alongside Alan Smith in that Cup Winners' Cup triumph for Arsenal in the mid-90s. Kevin Betsy was playing as well. He played in the Premier League briefly for Fulham, but had a very good career and is an excellent coach. But everybody came back, and there were a couple from the Woking trophy-winning treble in the mid-90s as well, who were in their late 50s, who would put on a show. They were the oldest, and I took my group in at half-time into one of the dressing rooms and said, right, I suppose you'll want to come off now. No. And it was the easiest half-time talk any manager's ever had to give. Right, just do the same again. But it was the result was immaterial. The fellowship and friendship was wonderful. So I wanted to give that a mention on the podcast. Very well organised by Woking Football Club, and it was a pleasure to be there. I also want to mention Kieran McKenna, who I can't really count as an old player, but because he was a player, and of course the reason he's such a young coach is that his playing career was savaged by injury, but what a performance. Ipswich had some wonderful times as a commentator at Portman Road. Even going back to the Bobby Robson years, it was such a welcoming club to go to. I saw Jason Cundy score the strangest goal probably in Premier League history there, where he tackled an opponent and the ball flew about 60 yards into the net. I was lucky to see it, to be honest. And Jason does mention it about once every 4 shows when he's on his radio show. But it wasn't extraordinary. That was at Portman Road. But it'd be great to have Ipswich back, and I think the joy of football respects that. So that's 2 before I get on to the real one, which is Andy Woodman, who has taken Bromley, and I've been involved in non-league football since I was 8 or 9 years old as a Woking fan. Been to Bromley many, many times. They're in the EFL for the first time in their history, and he's the manager who's done it. And also, he's a great guy, a real fun guy. I'm sure he's the best after-dinner speaker you could probably want to book. But he's been in the shadow of a certain Gareth Southgate for a long time. They're great pals as players at Crystal Palace. And the book was written Woody and Nord being Gareth, because I thought it was a play on north-south, but it's to do with somebody saying that he sounded like Dennis Norden. That's not one for the teenagers, is it really? Who was on television doing all those things that went wrong onto hosting. I can't remember what it was called, but he was on it, very funny man.
It'll be all right on the night.
It'll be all right on the night, that's right. And it was all right on the day for Bromley Football Club. And Andy was a good goalkeeper. He had a good career, a nomadic career himself as a player. And so that should mention why he's an old player. But he's also father of Freddie, who's played for England up to under 21 levels and was in a World Cup winning side at the age group level. And he's now playing for Preston, having had a spell at Newcastle, where Andy was also a Premier League coach under Alan Pardew. And he followed him around a little bit. So he's been there, done a lot. But this would top it all. I'm really, really pleased for him, for the football club. And one very selfish reason, they'll have to rip up the plastic pitch. And as these podcasts go on, you'll know I'm not a lover of that. And the EFL continue not to allow them to be part of the playing surfaces. And that's because the older players don't like it. And also, it isn't the same as grass. Of course, it has economic reasons, and Bromley have done very well out of that. But it has to go up now, and so they're playing on grass. But they won. It is an advantage, I think, in non-league football. That's probably why I'm so against it. If you're not playing on it every week, the teams that do play on it every week do have an advantage when you bring your team to that plastic pitch. And I think if you look at promotions through non-league football, quite a lot of plastic pitch teams have actually made that count in their favour. But it's on grass at Wembley, penalty shootout in the end. I haven't had the chance to speak to Andy since it happened, but I've been in the opposing dugout with him a few times. That's the only time he does lose his sense of humour, I think, but then maybe I do as well. So well done, Bromley. Well done, Andy Woodman, and old player, but youngish coach. And that's one to sit alongside. Imagine if Woody wins promotion with Bromley and Gareth wins the European Championships. That they bring out another edition of the book, I think.
My old player, I'm sticking with our Champions League theme this week, and the Chelsea era of being in the Champions League has led me to see a lot of the great players, and obviously Messi and Ronaldo and Messi ride high above everyone, but I've got to say neither of them, in all the games that I've seen them, have been one of the best players I've seen. Now, I'm not saying that they're not over their careers and over season after season, but the fact is that Chelsea played Barcelona in 2005, 2006, 2007, 2009, 2012, and Messi didn't score against us once. He never scored against John Terry. And in his first spell at Manchester United, which was obviously his major spell at Manchester United, Cristiano Ronaldo only got one league goal against Chelsea. These were not the great players of their careers turning it on when I was seeing them on a regular basis. And the player I want to talk about today is the player who turned it on every time I saw him, which was probably only 4 times in the flesh, but he was head and shoulders the best player every time, was Ronaldinho. Ronaldinho, before Messi and Ronaldo, I think won the World Player of the Year, the Ballon d'Or, whatever it was called in that era, 2 or 3 times in a row, I think. And he burnt out when he was about 27 because he didn't just indulge in the joy of football, he indulged in the joy of life. And the stories I heard of him at Barcelona were I'm not surprised that Pep didn't keep him when he took over as manager. He enjoyed his life. But do you remember, though, he created more than anybody the look away pass, look one way and pass the other. His warm-ups were an entertainment in themselves. Not since Paul Gascoigne had I seen such incredible joy of football warm-ups. But he also scored arguably the best goal I've ever seen for Barcelona at Stamford Bridge. When he toe-poked it when there was no room from the edge of the penalty area. And Petr Cech told me afterwards, some time afterwards, that he didn't know that the ball was in the net. He didn't know it was a goal, and he was still looking for it through the legs of everybody. He hadn't actually seen the shot. He was just an incredible player. And what struck me when you were standing up close to him, as I had the privilege of being able to do, because he had those wonderful dreads, he looked taller than he was. He was actually not very tall. He's about 5'9", 5'10". But the other thing was, he was so strong. He was so strong. The hardest centre-backs in the world wouldn't knock him off the ball. He was strong, and he was talent, and he was fun.
Joy.
He was, and he was the best I've seen. He was.
And he knocked England out of the World Cup.
And that was deliberate. The commentaries, that those xenophobic English commentaries, we can't be undone by something of quality, that was like nonsense. It was genius.
I was working for Australia, so I was neutral. I had to be. A lot of the Australians did want to see England knocked out of the World Cup.
And did you think it was genius or
I can't remember, Neil, to be honest with you. I don't think I called it a fluke, but there may be something out there on YouTube that proves that the other way. All I know is that it was everything you say about him is absolutely right. He's been paraded, obviously Barcelona and Paris as well, of course. He's been paraded around as a guest, or been doing some media commitments at these games, and he's such a smiley person that you can't help but he's just got an infectious grin, and his football was just so attractive to perceive. And when we look back, and it is hard in different generations in football, obviously the backdrop changes, the laws change, the difference of whether you're getting kicked up in the air or not has changed in the last 20 years or so. But he's right up there. And you mentioned Cristiano Ronaldo. I always think the other Ronaldo, the phenomenon, it also should be bracketed in this envelope as well. So I quite liked football when it was attritional, because winning and scoring a goal was such a special thing, and games were tight, and you could manage games if you like and get across the line. That was a little bit of the Dortmund stuff, basically get a 1-0 and have a lap of honour, totally merited. But the way the game is now, and the chance of counterattack vs counterattack, and it is, and we're not quite getting to basketball scores, but we are getting to basketball type football, aren't we? Where it's your turn to attack and our turn to defend, and then we attack and you defend. So it's getting more joyful, I think, even with every passing season.
And I think it's really easy to forget the way football works. Chance. 2003, Fergie had had enough of Beckham. Real Madrid were the Galacticos. Real Madrid bought Beckham. Manchester United went for Paris Saint-Germain's Ronaldinho and lost out to Barcelona, and instead signed Cristiano Ronaldo. That's how it happened, as my memory serves it, and it was right for everybody.
It was, especially the fans.
Yeah. Right, okay. From there, we come to the stage where I can get riled up. This is the voice of passion.
Voice of passion.
Data. We're going to run our club on data. We're going to decide on data. Let's start with the data that Opta provides. Assists. What a load of garbage assists are. They are given for the last touch. I spent from 2012 to 2019 watching Eden Hazard beat 6 men and score a goal in game after game, and whoever gave him the ball in the centre circle would get an assist. It's angered me this last period. I mean, anybody who watched the Real Madrid Bayern Munich game, does someone get an assist for that Alphonso Davies goal? It was quite a good pass out to him. But when he got the ball on the left wing, it wasn't a goal-scoring opportunity. And when he cut in, and you were talking about hitting the ball with your wrong foot, and hit it with his right foot into the top corner. World-class player, Alphonso Davies. Brilliant, brilliant. What a goal. But you don't have an assist for that. Now, I watched Chelsea dismantle...
You're almost saying you shouldn't have a goal if you're on the line and you just have to tap it in. Because there's got no merit in that. A 25-yarder should count for more in your database than...
No, well, I mean...
it probably does, because you're looking at... Listen, I've had my debates with Opta mostly about touches in the opposing penalty area, because they count any involvement. It's an involvement, not a touch. So if you use the expression touch for one touch finish, which we all accept, is the player just has one touch put the ball in the net, and then you use it when he has 8 touches in the penalty area and it only counts as one touch. Touch is not the right word. The data is relevant, but it should be involvement.
Yeah.
They can't.
Do you know, I didn't know that.
No, well, it's the truth. They can't, believe it or not, tell when Eden Hazard, use your example, he dribbles into the penalty area, how many times does he touch the ball before he squares it for somebody else, or how many times, if it doesn't lead to a goal, how many times did he touch the ball? It only counts as one.
Well,
so but that's not Opta's fault. You have to. It's just a word.
Yeah.
I think you could change the word. But data has to be made available. It's what you do with the data, Neil.
Exactly. I agree totally. Now, I want to pick out one goal. Chelsea beat West Ham 5-0, and there was quite a lot of publicity about the goal because it involved Noni Madueke and Nicholas Jackson, who had the battle over the penalty in the previous home game, or 2 home games previously against Everton. And it was a ball over the top that Madueke broke onto, and he squared it to Jackson rather than take on the goalkeeper, and Jackson put it in. But Madueke was one-on-one with the goalkeeper. How was he one-on-one with the goalkeeper? Because Trevor Chalobah had hit a glorious 50-yard pass that created the goal, that is not seen as an assist on the data because it's not the last touch.
But those who are looking at Trevor Chalobah will know that he's done that. It just doesn't count as, if you like, as a figure.
No, so all I'm saying is assist data, and that leads to what is now the trend, goal involvements, are not informative.
Well, they are if you're looking at it from a different point. If you're just looking at the board stats and you don't have... I mean, these stats are really for the benefit of people in the game. All the laptop warriors now, all the coaches that come through, all the young coaches, all have to have statistical courses behind them. They all have to understand how to interpret these figures. And the figure, I mean, take another example of data, percentage completed passes. If you're a centre-back and you pass it to your mate, square across the other centre-back, he passes it back to you. You could do that for 5 minutes, because maybe less so now because it's a bit more of a press. But there was a period in the game where you could boost your stats in a 2-minute period every 20 minutes in the game by just passing it to each other 5 yards. But people know that. So I think stats are there to be interpreted, not to be worshipped, you know?
Yeah, but the assist stats are misrepresentative. That's all. Because the individual soloists, whoever gives you the ball, there shouldn't be an assist. And in many goals, there should be 2, 3, 4 assists in the build-up that are absolutely critical to the opening of the defence.
One that I don't get is own goals. If someone hammers the ball across, a dangerous ball looking for the teammate, and it goes in off somebody else, would be assist. If your teammate puts it in, it's forced a goal.
Yeah,
and therefore it has assisted on the goal.
Yeah, or if
these are just things.
Or if you hammer a ball against the crossbar and it bounces down on the line and someone heads it in, you don't get an assist for that either.
Or if this is one that has happened a couple of times. If you take a penalty and it hits the post, hits the goalkeeper and goes in, it goes down as an own goal if it's in free play. If it's in the match, in a penalty shootout, it doesn't. It's absolutely the same incident. So you're taking the same incident and interpreting it in different ways.
I never thought of that. That's brilliant. How true is that?
Well, it's true. I mean, it must be true. Any shot that hits the bar and comes out and hits the goalkeeper on the back, it goes down as an own goal. And a penalty, I think it might have been a Chelsea one that, if you don't remember it, it probably wasn't. But one that went down as an own goal when really I mean, if you're giving it as a goal in a shootout, I've never seen an own goal recorded in the shootout. I can tell you that as a fact.
Yeah. Unbelievable. I hadn't thought of that. I've got even more reason to be passionate this week than I even thought. You've got my juices for it.
I've given the voice of reason on behalf of Opta and all the statisticians who have helped me a lot in my career. But you just have to know what to look for. And the more you love the game, the more the joy is in doing that as well. And saying, well, it's like if someone scores 20 goals a season, how many of those goals win points? You know, if you get 20 goals and they're all the third, you're in a good team and they're all the third and fourth, fifth goals in a win, they're not as relevant to the worth of the player, but as a stat, they're there. And 20 goals, I mean, even in my little non-league career, that was the target as a striker, to get 20 goals in a season. And when you did, you didn't quite down tools, but you thought, I'll be back for another year. So anyway, keep doing the stats for us, please, and I'll look after him. Don't worry.
Right, we're going to finish this week with a new segment called Stoppage Time.
That's another 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Then, is it? Yeah.
And I'm going to bring up a letter that was sent to the Financial Times by Tom Mooney from Ireland. And this is what he had to say, Martin.
Can I just add that Neil would read the Financial Times? It's not on my list.
Actually, it was sent to me by someone who reads it.
Oh, right.
Oliver Roeder attributes a gradual goal spike in the English Premiership to the fact that there's more football and less stoppage time, supported by football data. There is perhaps another reason, more obvious to the eye than data. Tackling is becoming extinct. Where are the monikers today, so beloved, by me at least, of yesteryear? Ron Chopper Harris of Chelsea or Norman Bites-Your-Legs Hunter of Leeds United? A record 28 million turned in to watch the replay of the 1970 FA Cup final between Chelsea and Leeds at Old Trafford. And boy, were they entertained. It was thankfully officiated by the let them off school of refereeing. Reviewing the match 30 years later, David Ellery, who we would still like to see on this show.
Yes, David, the invitation is still there.
Counted fouls warranting 20 yellow cards and 6 red by modern standards. And the score, a stingy 2-1 to Chelsea. The winning goal scored by David Webb, using his head, far safer than his right peg. More goals because
not medically proven, but I know what you mean in terms of ability.
He was good football. He played in every position. More goals because there are fewer hard men.
More goals because the laws have changed. I mean, you can't be a hard man. You won't last 5 minutes. I mean, you can intimidate, I'm sure, and there are players who might just be verbally doing some intimidation, or maybe at times with a set piece where you know you can grab and probably get away with it. But the game is the better for it. Neil, I grew up. I mean, I was attracted to the game because it was a really, it was a battle in every sense: battle of skill, battle of will, battle of strength, and played on muddy pitches where the connection, the engagement between players was much more regular because they couldn't get away now.
And also, people of different physical and technical abilities can maximise themselves and play in a way that they can't in other sports because the restrictions are so huge.
But I say again, Neil, the game's the better for it. We like boxing, we like wrestling, we like combat sports, don't we? And they're very popular and they're also very good to participate in and bring a sort of discipline, and a lot of young people benefit from going into that. But football's about, you know, the joy of the players we've talked about today, and there will always be those who'll be a bit sneaky, won't there? I mean, but
I look back and I think Tommy Smith as well at Liverpool and players like that. The hard men used to be more defenders, and if I look more recently at the Roy Keanes and the Patrick Vieiras and those kind of players, David Batty even, Dennis Wise, I'm looking at midfielders. I just think it's moved forward a little bit.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I would say John Terry was a hard man. He could play football, but he was, you know, he wasn't
Vidic.
He wasn't anybody's fool. Vidic got sent off a lot, even when the laws were different. You know, so listen. It is we do, I think, speaking for football fans generally, which we're not empowered to do, of course, but I do think the physical contest is part of the spectacle, but it's not the main spectacle. The main spectacle is winning, and winning with panache now and scoring goals. And honestly, this season is extraordinary. I mean, we're nearly to the point where we're adding up the total Premier League goals, and the figures will all come out how much the ratio of goals per game is higher than it's certainly ever been in the Premier League. And I think, unless it's these figures are not as accurate as I believe them to be, since the 1960s. So we should be grateful for that. It's a good time to start a podcast called The Joy of Football.
There's only one thing to follow that with from Martin and me.
Goodbye.
Ta-ra. Once again, if you want to email us, the joys, plural, the joys of football podcast at gmail.com. If you want to listen, you can hear it, see it anytime on all the usual outlets. And you can also go on the Patreon and start getting involved with us that way. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for loving the greatest addiction in the world. The joy of football.